Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week are Daniel Jones and Jeremy Brown, returning to us from the void from whence he comes. How are you guys doing?
Do you come from a void, Jeremy? I mean, I guess we all came from a void.
I know, I avoid Jeremy.
as most do.
Yeah.
I come from the land down under, which is a void, not Australia, to be clear.
Is our podcast slowly developing its own cosmology?
Yeah,
There's just a void underneath the earth.
that's right.
I like it.
Pretty soon on one of the episodes of how the universe works, they're just going to be talking about our our existence. I was going to try to say something
Isn't
fancy.
that where
but
the
I couldn't.
kaiju come from?
What?
Isn't that where the kaiju come from?
No, that's a dimensional rift. That's different.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This week we are talking about the original OG Legend of Zelda in honor of the recent release of a little indie game you might have heard of called Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
And OG
We use that
stands-
indie game joke way too often.
It's not really a joke anymore. It's just an obligation.
It's just kind of a...
and OG stands for Original Golden Cartridge, right?
Yep.
Yep.
OGC. The C is silent most of the time.
Golden Cartridge is one word.
Sure it is.
Okay, so I'm just going to shut up and let Jack finish.
Of the three of us, only one of us has actually gone and gotten a Switch, which would be Mr. Jeremy Brown.
Hey, it me.
Yeah. How is the Switch? What are your initial thoughts on touching it?
The hardware?
This is the Nintendo
Yeah.
Switch, right? Not the light switch.
Correct.
Okay.
The Nintendo Switch.
It works really well for what it does. It's sleek and slick and controls beautifully. The UI is really nice. Don't think it's worth $300?
No, not even with Zelda as a launch.
Well, then that makes it $370. But
True.
yeah, I mean, Zelda is pretty amazing. It really is. So that definitely helps it out. But if we're talking hardware alone, it works, like I said, it works really well, but it's kind of like a Kindle Fire HD, I guess, in that regard.
Okay.
What you mean?
If that makes any sense.
Like, it
Except
feels cheap?
with less applications. It doesn't really feel cheap. Kindle Fires actually feel pretty solid, if you ask me. But it doesn't do anything except games. That's literally all it does. You can't download Netflix. You can't,
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who are saying it's not a big deal that Netflix isn't on it because we have so many other devices that can do Netflix. But come on, it's like a basic staple. It's like Netflix is like the bread of launch apps. You just it's a good idea to have it.
Well, it is
Right?
kind of a big deal because, like, the power supply is like the old Nintendo bricks or the Xbox bricks. Like,
Really?
and it goes right into your power strip. So, like, it takes up like 4 places, even though you only plug it into one. So we had to unplug the PS4 to have it upstairs, and therefore no Netflix in the living room.
Wait, so the actual plug that plugs into a power strip or the wall is
Yeah,
one of those colossal...
yeah. No,
Why- why do
Dylan
people
could have
do
been
that?
smarter and plugged it into one of the end ones. Don't get me wrong, but still.
But no, it's... That's just a minor irritating thing. Like,
Because still it takes up not just the end one that you put it into, it takes up the other one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like right
like
after it.
if it would have been
typically.
a plug-in that went to that and that thing just dangled, it would have been fine. But that's the actual plug-in. So, yeah.
Hate that.
But it really is intuitive. Like, the touch screen works really well. When you have it on handheld mode, it is gorgeous for a tiny 720p screen. It's pretty flawless from switching from TV to the handheld. Like, it just takes literally a second, and you're at the exact same spot doing the same things you were doing. Dylan played it all the way to Great Falls and back today, which, I don't know, it's a good 2 hours, and the battery still was in fairly decent shape when we got home.
Wow.
So yeah, as far as hardware goes, it works really well for what it does so far that I've seen.
When you carry it in handheld mode, does it have like a sleep mode, or do you
Yes.
just turn it off? Like, Like, is it
Both-
like the Vita, where you can
it
do
will-
a hard
Yeah,
power?
it will go to sleep after a certain amount of time on its own,
Gotcha. Okay.
and it saves everything where you're at when it does that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, would you say to people who are kind of on the fence about the Switch, like, wait for a little bit until either it comes down in price or there are a few more games you can pick up for it? That's kind of the vibe I'm getting.
I don't think people have an option but to wait at this point.
Yeah.
But
True.
I went to a couple GameStops today. I'll tell you guys that story, but I went to a couple of
Me too.
GameStops today and asked both of them if they had Switches, just out of curiosity, and they both laughed at me.
yeah, the two I went to said maybe by Easter
Wow.
they would get
Okay.
like a few more. Like he said, no more until then, no matter what. Yeah, I don't know that it's going to come down in price anytime soon. And
Nah.
as far as software that's coming out for it, I don't really know what's on the horizon that's completely fabulous. Like
Okay.
in the next 3 to 4 months. So I definitely wouldn't buy one on eBay for like $700 unless you really, really, really love Zelda.
I did see one going today on eBay for like $75,000. Probably not going to go through, but it did tickle me a
ridiculous.
little bit. It is interesting how Nintendo, despite being in the console game for such a long time, seems unable to get enough consoles out.
But it's
Or
not even just
communicate.
hardware. Like their software, they do. It's got to be intentional. There was literally a couple months ago. I don't remember what game, but there was a digital game that sold out for Nintendo.
What?
Yes,
No.
How's that happen?
because they wanted to.
Like they had a set amount of digital games that they were selling.
I guess, yeah. Unless I was
Yeah.
reading an Onion type article and just didn't quite catch on. But
That sounds not quite right, but
I agree.
at the same time, I wouldn't put it past Nintendo. Interesting. How about Zelda itself, Breath of the Wild? How does
It
that?
is breathtakingly amazing.
Oh,
I don't
man.
want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to go into great detail.
Okay,
Because I think you both should play it.
fair enough.
Oh, yeah. I plan on it.
To be clear, I haven't personally played it, but I've been watching Dylan play it for about 30 hours. And, no, I mean, it's just it's his birthday present, right? So
Right.
I'm not going to spoil that fun. Which
Yeah.
will kind of spoil it a bit for me. Like, by the time I play it, I should be able to do a speed run. But it's classic Zelda in so many ways, but also beautifully different in a few ways that I think really set it apart. I have maybe 2 gripes about it. One of them's kind of major, the other one not so much.
Are they spoiler gripes, or are they gripes you can kind of list off here real quick?
I don't think they're spoiler, because one of them everybody's been talking about. The weapon durability and the way the weapons work is pretty crap.
Are they just super flimsy?
They are. So you're...
Is that the major one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And the way that, like, you have to switch weapons constantly, not during boss fights, just even fighting normal, whatever, hobgoblins, or whatever the hell they're called.
Yeah.
Moblins.
Like, it just kind of takes you out of the moment to have to go in and select a new weapon. Not just a few times, like, non-stop.
Does it actually pause the game when you go into the pause menu, or does it do the Dark Souls thing where
The
things
Dark
keep
Souls
happening?
thing, yeah.
You have a couple different options. There's one that's almost Dark Souls thing, and there's another one where you actually go into the menu. Dylan prefers going into the menu, so maybe I'm just a victim of
So
watching
you
that.
can kind of hotkey them?
You cannot hotkey them, but you can bring up
Oh, man.
you can bring up your shields, your bows, and your melee weapons with hotkeys, and then you can scroll through those to pick which one you want.
Ugh.
But there's so few
In the middle of a fight.
but there's so few inventory slots for those
Right.
3 things that a lot of times you have to actually go through, you have to go into the start menu and do it that way so you can drop something to pick something up. Because you can throw your weapon away easily. Like your weapon can be used as a ranged weapon, your melee weapons, and it's really easy to just toss it at something when you didn't mean to. So you'll be like weaponless, and certain enemies are more vulnerable to certain types of weapons. So that's kind of a pain. That's my biggest gripe. And there's really,
Okay.
you can only repair a couple of weapons, and you have to go way out of your way to be able to do it, and it's not worth it. I think once you get the Master Sword, that won't happen as much. Like, I don't know that the Master Sword is susceptible to damage.
I heard in an interview that it is.
It? Okay.
Yeah. That's one detail that has stuck with me. Like, for whatever reason, I remember it might have been Aonuma who said, like, no, the Master Sword is just like any other weapon, and it has durability.
I have to imagine you can just revitalize it somehow, because
that would seem crazy to have to, like, toss the Master Sword aside.
Well, and we haven't even gotten the Master Sword, so...
Right.
Yeah.
And Dylan's beaten 3 of the divine beasts, which are basically the dungeons, the temples from
Dungeon bosses.
Zelda. Yeah. He says you have to have 13 hearts to get the Master Sword. I don't know where he gets that from, but right now he has 10. So
okay, getting there.
The small gripe is the frame rate. It drops terribly bad at times.
Really? Does that depend on how many creatures are on screen, or does it depend on the location?
It doesn't really seem to depend on the creatures, more on location.
And is that more when it's undocked or when it's...
I haven't really watched Dylan play it while it's undocked.
Okay.
That's just weird, right? I'd have to hover over his shoulder. And he's only played it undocked today when we went to Great Falls. So
okay.
So when it's docked, I guess, is what I've noticed it.
Because I've been hearing some complaints about games not running very smoothly when it's out of its dock. The Dragon Quest game was one people were saying you can't play it undocked because it lags so bad, or the frame rate dips.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't last long when it dips, but it's certainly noticeable. Like,
have you experienced any of the controller lag?
No, which is weird because it's sitting literally right next to our wireless router, and like that's one of the things that's supposed to set it off.
Right, that's one. Yeah.
It's behind the TV, which is another thing that's supposed to set it off. It's
wow. Okay.
Maybe it's because like there's not a lot of people around us.
That could be.
It seems to be an issue more with people that live in the cities, just based off what I've seen.
Yeah.
On Twitters and whatnot.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But the game itself is remarkable. It's a must play. Definitely a must play. Whether it's on Wii U or Switch or whatever.
Well, you know what else is a pretty remarkable game? The very first Legend of Zelda.
Wait, there were Zeldas before this?
Jeremy, is the Legend of Zelda the original Legend of Zelda, the one that your uncle stole from you?
Yes, sir.
So is this episode going to dredge up some...
Well, no, technically he stole that from the video game store. He stole my Nintendo from me.
Wait, what?
Read a flippin' blog, Jack. Jeez.
I did. But I don't remember the part where he stole the Legend of Zelda. I thought he stole that from you along with the Nintendo.
So you were just renting the Legend of Zelda?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You need to tell this story because you have a very odd connection with this game. That
yeah,
I mean,
some people that listen to this show might not know this story.
Like from the very, very beginning.
Yeah, go for it.
Tell the story.
God,
just tell it.
I've done it so many times. Okay, so it was Christmas, probably 1997 or 8, and I didn't have a Nintendo. All the cool kids had a Nintendo. I didn't have a Nintendo.
You mean 87?
Isn't that what I said? 87 or 88?
You said 97.
Okay, whatever. 87 or 88, yes. And
I was just doing the math in my head, and I was like, wow, you were late to the party.
Yeah, real late.
Sorry.
So anyway, I was pretty young at the time, like 9, 10, maybe. And this dude that was, I understand now, clearly courting my grandmother. Like, he brought home a Nintendo one day and gave it to me, and I was like, hell yeah. Not home, like he didn't live there. Like, he just brought it over, right?
Yeah.
And, like, as soon as he left, he wasn't there very long. My grandma said I couldn't keep it. And I was like, oh, God, that's terrible. I'm like, I want it so bad. Because I played basically Mario. That's all I'd played at friends' houses. Fast forward to, like, Christmas time. And long story short, my grandma ends up buying me a Nintendo for Christmas.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. And I had Super Mario, and that was it. That's all. And Duck Hunt, obviously. That's all I cared about. because that's all I knew. So a few months later, my uncle showed up. He'd been in Arizona, and he was clearly into some nefarious things while he was down there. He was in pretty rough shape. He would play my Nintendo with me, and at first it was pretty cool because we were playing Mario, and you had the 2-player thing, right? You know, one person dies, the next person gets to play as Luigi. Well, when I would go to school, he would sit there and play, and he got really, really good at it. So after a while, it was like he would play through the entire game while I had to watch him, and then I would get my turn. So one day, he got a copy of Zelda from the video store, the Legend of Zelda, the gold cartridge. And I just assumed it was like Mario, where one person got to play and then the other person got to play, but it was not. So I'd watch him play that game and play that game, and I really liked it. He wasn't that good at it, but who was when it first came out? You know, there weren't like guides or the internet and those sorts of things. So you could make your own separate file, so I made my own separate file, so it was kind of 2-player like that. And the very few times that he wasn't there, when I would play it, but I would always get stuck, like I could never ever advance. But I played the crap out of that game for probably a couple months because it never got returned to the video store. Anyway, those couple of months passed by, and one day I show up after school, and he's gone, the Nintendo's gone, Zelda's gone, everything's gone.
What?
Yeah, so he essentially took it and traded it for some other nefarious things, and yeah.
See, that's the worst part, is that he didn't just, like, keep it. And
yeah, that would be one thing. That'd be fine.
And just enjoy it. And,
I mean, it wouldn't be fine.
It would be somewhat better. At least I could play it at his eventual house.
And that put you off the Zelda franchise for a long time, right?
Yeah, because, like he was obsessed with Zelda. At least with Mario, once he beat it, he kind of got bored, and I could play it once in a while.
Yeah.
But when it came to Zelda, like, he was obsessed with it. And like I said, it wasn't like Mario, where you couldn't beat the game once you got really good at it in a couple of hours, and then I got to play, or player 2 got to play. I had to sit there and watch him, and watch him, and watch him. That game ended up really pissing me off, because that was the last game that was in my Nintendo that I knew of before it left. Now, to be fair, I did get another Nintendo, and I got games like Double Dribble, and John Elway's Quarterback, and a few Tecmo Bowl, mostly sports games now that I think about it. Actually, all sports games now that I think about it. You know, got to play all of those. But there was... I never, ever wanted to play Zelda again for quite some time. Until Twilight Princess, to be honest with you.
That's like several generations of
Well, there were several
Zelda
generations
games.
I didn't play any video games. So
Exactly.
Right.
But,
yeah. But now you're back. You're back. Are you ready to dive into this game?
No, I'd rather tear up
talk about it.
some old childhood memories and not start until I'm completely sobbing. So yes, let.
I'm sorry.
No. Yes, I'm ready to talk about Zelda.
Okay. So, this game released in 1986, originally, didn't come to the United States until 1987, was originally titled not The Legend of Zelda, was released for the Famicom Disk System, which was like a floppy disk add-on for the Famicom, the Japanese equivalent of the Nintendo Entertainment System. And it was released under the title The Hyrule Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda 1, which makes a lot more sense than The Legend of Zelda, because it's not really a legend about Zelda. You're playing. It's more like The Legend of Link.
yeah, but she's always kind of right in the middle of it.
But not always.
Wouldn't say always.
Like, there are plenty of Legend of Zelda games where Zelda is not in it at all.
Yeah.
True.
It was localized for the United States under the title of The Legend of Zelda, and it's probably one of the most interesting old-school Nintendo games for the NES, just for like a whole variety of reasons, like from gameplay design to the technical limits that they pushed with the game and all kinds of other stuff going on. So
It came close to never coming to the United States.
oh really?
Yeah, the president of Nintendo at the time, and I suck at Japanese names, so I'm not even going to try. He thought that it was too complex for... He wasn't, like, insulting us, but he thought, we wouldn't we wouldn't be intrigued by it. We wouldn't take the time it took to get interested in it and keep playing it. So we didn't really think it was worth localizing. So what they ended up doing was having a bunch of Nintendo of America employees come to Japan and play the game, and they had a bunch of Nintendo Japan employees sitting right next to them, and they would translate everything for them. And they soon realized that us dumb Americans really would play this game and could get into it. So then they made the decision to localize it.
Well, yeah, that is a weird thing about late 80s, early 90s Nintendo, was that they didn't think very well about North American gamers.
Well, I think they just thought we were a completely different audience.
Right. But there was a trend back then to when you translated a game from Japan to a North American release, you would make the games easier. And by you, I mean Nintendo would. So that's why we got what in Japan was a completely different game, but here it was released as Super Mario Bros. 2. And we didn't see the actual Super Mario Bros. 2 until, like, the Super Nintendo era. I didn't know that they were initially not even planning on releasing it here.
Yeah.
But I did know they expected it to bomb. They were not expecting it to do very well in North America, even, I guess, after they were convinced that they should release it here.
Which is funny because it's in large part based off Atari 2600 game that was completely made in America named Adventure.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, you know, it might have just been the president throwing his weight around and wanted to see us silly Americans actually enjoying it. But
it's similar to, like, the story of Final Fantasy, if you think of it. Square did not think Final Fantasy was going to do well in the States either. So it was just like at the time, like, for some reason, Japanese publishers had that view of American.
Well, you know, it might have been because of the video game crash.
yeah.
And just thinking, because the video game crash didn't really happen in Japan, as far as I understand it.
No, not like it did here.
No.
And so I think they were probably just looking at the marketing data at the time and being like, well, not a whole lot of people are buying video games in North America because we had been the market had been so betrayed and abused by Atari and all these junkware games.
Yeah.
Like E.T.
Yeah.
So maybe it's less like... I'm guessing it's less like malice or ill will or stereotyping on their part more than looking at the marketing data and seeing, well, not as many games are being sold in America, so Americans probably aren't as good at video games.
Yeah, I don't think it was meant to be, like, thinking we're stupid. I think
Right.
they, like you said, they just felt like this market would not support it.
Right.
Right.
Which is funny because they ended up spending $10 million on 2 god-awful Zelda commercials.
Those are weird. Like, honestly, pause this podcast and go to YouTube and look up the original Legend of Zelda ads that they ran to advertise it here in the States. They are almost like performance art pieces rather than like for an actual product.
Interpretive dance.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it
Interpretive
worked.
rap.
It's definitely attention getting.
Yeah, they both are for
True.
completely different reasons, but yeah.
Sorry, Daniel, what were you saying?
Well, no, I was just trying to transition to the game itself. Because there's plenty to talk about with that game. Like,
Yeah.
even to this day, I mean, 30 years later, we're talking about that game's influence as it relates to Breath of the Wild, in that Nintendo designed Breath of the Wild to be a return to the open nature of the original Legend of Zelda. Like, people who were introduced to Zelda through anything from even Link to the Past to Ocarina or Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess or Wind Waker, like, they might not grasp, like, what the Legend of Zelda was actually like.
Right.
It really was just, you started, you had nothing, and then you went into a little cave and you got a sword and a shield, and, you know, it's dangerous to go alone, take this. But, like, you could totally miss that cave. you could totally just walk past it and get destroyed. And even once you get them, like, you, depending on where you go, like, you have so many options of places to go and places to wander, and it never tells you which way is best, which is the best path to take, and which is the best direction to go. It just says, here, go. And that's just remarkable, especially for that time.
Yeah. Honestly, one of my favorite bits of trivia about The Legend of Zelda is, like, when it was being beta tested and the testers were kind of complaining about this open world-ness of the game, because you have to remember, at the time, open worlds were almost unheard of. Like, just wandering and being able to go anywhere and still make progress in this game, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And so people were worried that gamers wouldn't be able to grasp that. And in response to these complaints from his beta testers, Shigeru Miyamoto took away the sword, because initially you started with the sword in your inventory. And as, like, a giant middle finger to these beta testers who were complaining, he just took it away and put it in the cave, which created one of the more iconic moments of the NES gaming generation. Like, we still quote, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this." And that just evolved out of basically Shigeru Miyamoto giving a middle finger to his beta testers, which I find very funny.
There's a little more to that story, not just that part of that story, but yeah, he was pissed off when the beta testers were like, "This is too hard." He did end up conceding quite a few things, though, and making a lot of changes based on that stuff. But
oh yeah, like, to me, it's super interesting how the vision for what The Legend of Zelda would be shifted during development. And this is, again, we're going a little bit off track of what the game is actually about. But originally it was intended to be almost like Super Mario Maker, where people could make their own levels on this Famicom disk drive. They could make their own levels, and then they would be able to put their levels on these floppy disks and share them with their friends. And then their friends could go through the dungeons that they had made and, defeat them. And it was supposed to be this really kind of communal experience. And that ended up getting completely scrapped. But imagine, like, that, just imagining that, and how even today we still don't have something like that for even a 2D Legend of Zelda game. Imagine Legend of Zelda Maker. Like, you can easily see that being a game that would be made today. And that's how forward-thinking the team working on The Legend of Zelda was. Where even a concept they came up with in 1984 could still be relevant today.
Right.
Also, just an interesting little thing to note, for all of you Dragon Ball fans out there, the initial backstory for The Legend of Zelda was actually written by one of the writers for Dragon Ball.
I did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah. So, just a little connection. Like, he wrote the backstory in the manual for the game, which, is now considered official lore for the entire series, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So, what exactly is The Legend of Zelda? If we want to get down to brass tacks and actually talk about the game itself rather than what was going on around the game.
Well, I would call it a third-person top-down action-adventure game. 2D, obviously.
I mean, that's the most basic way to describe it. There are very few frills in this game, really, when you think about it. There are dungeons. How many dungeons are there?
9, I think.
In the original, 8. Well, there's 8 pieces of the Triforce you have to collect.
And then
you have
isn't
to
there one more?
defeat, so 9 technically, yeah.
Yeah, so there's 8 pieces of the Triforce you collect, and whereas like later Zelda games had become about these kind of grand adventures, and really just even by like Zelda 2, it had become about that a bit more. And then with Link to the Past, it was really about this grand adventure. This one, you didn't really know exactly what you were doing, but so it was more about just exploration than adventure. And it was just discovering.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say you didn't know exactly what you were doing because, again, this was back in the day when people actually had manuals and read them.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That provided a lot more context for what was going on in the
game.
Or
you could always call the Nintendo hotline at $3.99 a minute.
Oh, yeah. So I know I just said we were going to talk about the game, but I also didn't know that The Legend of Zelda almost single-handedly launched Nintendo Power.
I didn't realize that either, but it makes sense.
Like, every copy of The Legend of Zelda, at least initially, was sold with, like, this warranty voucher that you could send in to Nintendo, and then you would get a free subscription to, like, this newsletter that would come, and more people started signing up, and so the newsletter kept getting bigger and bigger until the president of Nintendo was just like, hey, let's just launch a magazine for all these people, and that's where Nintendo Power came from. Because they sold so many copies of The Legend of Zelda, they had an install base for this magazine.
They needed a way to help people, and maybe that's a problem with the game, if we're going to be a little critical of it.
Here's the thing, though. If taken by itself, yeah, the need for help is pretty, like, might be a pretty big knock against the game and how difficult it is to figure out things in general. But on the other hand, part of Miyamoto's reasoning for taking away the sword was to force players to communicate with each other. Like, oh yeah, you got to go in that cave. Like, forcing that interaction between friends or people who just play the game. And,
well,
and that's in a world.
It was the Pokemon Go of its time.
That's fine when you're in a room full of beta testers, but when you're some poor redneck kid in the middle of South Dakota, when the only thing around you is cows,
right,
that's a different story.
Right. And I think maybe that works better for, people who live in cities. And then, but they recognize that weakness, and so they launched the Nintendo hotline for people to call and get tips and stuff like that. And they, to their credit, they staffed that hotline pretty well.
But it wasn't free.
No, it wasn't free. That's true. But the newsletter was free.
Yeah.
However, I do think that being harsh on the game for that in a pre-internet era, I feel like we give a lot of things that are hard today a bigger pass because we have the internet, and that just makes talking with each other a lot easier.
We can always figure it out now if we have to. I mean, like, maybe we can't, but somebody else has. It's basically crowdsourcing. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Dark Souls is a very, very hard game if you have no idea what you're doing. But you can look up on the internet now and find a million strategy guides or walkthroughs. So I don't know. I don't want to knock it too much just for being difficult when I feel like it was trying to do something that was very forward thinking at the time.
Yeah.
By forcing kind of this community to grow around the game.
Yeah.
And I mean, it kind of did. Like, look at how ubiquitous The Legend of Zelda is. Like, people had to talk about it with each other, and so it got bigger and bigger and spread by word of mouth.
But it was hard. And confusing.
Yes.
Like, how do you know you got to set some random bush on fire? How do you even know you can set bushes on fire?
Right.
Yeah. And that is a good point. There are some mechanics that are not consistent. There's nothing that would teach you that you can set random bushes on fire, because you can't set every bush on fire in the game. If you could, that would make more sense that there would be a secret hidden under a specific bush. But that is not the case.
No, I don't knock the game too much for that, but I certainly do think it was constricting for the time and maybe certain regions. Like, sure, if you live in Tokyo and you probably played that game as part of your second grade, like, homework, where you're all sitting around playing it, then that's one thing. But
that's fair.
It held me back from the game, for sure, not knowing.
Yeah.
And my grandma sure wasn't going to let me spend $3.99 a minute to call the Nintendo hotline. That just was not happening.
To me, this is a lot like Dark Souls. I already mentioned that. But you are in this unbelievably hostile world where pretty much everything wants to kill you, and you're expected to go find the things without any hand-holding or barely any hints. And you're expected to go out and find items and beat these dungeons, and no one even tells you to go ring a bell. No one.
Yeah, that's true. And you can't summon anybody to help you.
No.
No, it's very challenging. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's no Duck Hunt, right? Like,
no.
It's interesting when, like, it's kind of a revelation when you realize that you don't have to kill everything in Zelda.
Yeah.
Like, you can just run right by guys. And because every time you leave a screen and you go back, they respawn. So it can get just, like, exhausting. And it can get very, you can die a lot. It can get very challenging because you're just, when you're exploring and you're trying to find your way around, for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, like, that game can be really daunting. But that makes it all the more satisfying when you do figure out, like, the best ways to go about doing things, and you feel like you've learned, but really it's not like a contrived kind of, like, hey, you got this new item, although that's there, but, like, you got this new item, now you can do this and this and this. It's more like, hey, I've just figured out, the trick to defeating this enemy, or the trick to just wandering around this world, and the best way to do it. And it's an early example of kind of, like, really smart learning curve in video games.
Well, part of it is the open world. And
yeah,
what's really unique about this at the time Zelda came out, typically games were very linear. Like, you went, at least console games. I know PC games had a little bit more flexibility, but on console at least, you had a linear experience and you went from point A to point B to point C and on. In The Legend of Zelda, you can do dungeons in pretty much any order. There are some limitations to that. Like, you need certain items from, like, previous dungeons to get to later ones.
Right.
But there is an element of unpredictability, I guess, because you don't need every item to get to the next dungeon, but every dungeon that has an item inside, that item is useful in that dungeon, but then it could be useful in a future dungeon too. You never really know, but it helps to get as many of the things as possible together.
Yeah.
And it's just very smartly designed that way. And, like, there's the... I learned this while I was researching. There's the commonly cited fact that Miyamoto said in an interview that he designed the game to kind of capture the feel of exploring caves that he had as a child.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I hadn't heard this part, which is that he designed the dungeons to be like the feeling, to give players the feeling he had getting lost in the sliding doors of
his home, childhood home. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
Which, it oddly makes a lot of sense if you, like, look up Japanese architecture and how everything's separated into, like, cubes by sliding doors.
Like, the sliding doors there aren't like the sliding doors here, where it's just one big rectangle. Like, it's all little tiny cubes, like, gridded out. So, like, I can just imagine him sitting there as a kid looking at those and picturing spaces in his head and, like, putting different colors and making all these different shapes in these cubes, a reverse swastika, for example, and coming up with this idea for this game. Yeah, there is a reverse swastika in Zelda. That's why I say that.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of interesting symbology going on in the Legend of Zelda game, and a lot of it has religious connotations, which is why in future versions of The Legend of Zelda, a lot of minor things are changed around. For example, one of the most famous ones is the cross on Link's shield, because Link was originally designed to kind of recapture that medieval knight, European knight vibe. And so originally he had a Christian cross on his shield, and that was later replaced by the Triforce.
Fun fact, I always thought initially that was just an upside-down sword. Like, I didn't even see it as a cross, to be honest.
Pixel art leaves a lot to interpretation.
It does.
For sure. Originally, the magic book from The Legend of Zelda was also just called The Bible.
I didn't know that either.
And that's something that I guess continued through a lot of the series, because Nintendo is very skittish about putting religious things in their games, but somehow these all slipped through.
It's that tricky Miyamoto.
For example, the if you play the N64 version of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, there's a symbol on, I think it's the mirror shield, that looks like a crescent star and a star that resembles
Islam?
Yeah, the Islamic symbol.
Yeah.
But in later versions of that game, it was changed to, a different symbol that has nothing to do, or does not remotely resemble the original. And I find that very odd. I guess also the Triforce has some racist connotations in the United States, which I wasn't aware of until you told me that the other day, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, I don't know that it's just in the United States. I think it's a few different areas that came from, but it's not necessarily the Triforce. It's just, like, how many ways can you separate a triangle, right? Like,
right.
Triangles have been around for longer than the KKK or Hitler or Zelda.
Right.
I think it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, in Japan specifically, the Triforce came from, like, a feudal era Japanese clan.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one. And the clan has that, not the KKK clan.
Clan with a C.
The Japanese clan has since died out, and I think the symbol was adopted by, I think, an electrical company.
Yeah.
In Japan, but the name, I guess, and symbol fit with what Miyamoto wanted to go for, and so that's why the Triforce exists, because to him it represents like a coming of age. These three different parts coming together to create something that's more powerful than the three of them separate.
Yeah.
Courage, power, wisdom. Yeah. Which I think that's a beautiful little thing right there.
It is.
It's wonderful.
I really appreciate the thought and effort that Miyamoto put into not only thinking up this game, but the series, but developing it as well. Like, there's a lot of symbolism in there that maybe Nintendo didn't want obvious, so he had to hide it a little bit, but none of it is hateful or meant to be ill-willed at all.
No. I think the worst you could say about The Legend of Zelda, or at least the original, is that the localization to North America was very sloppy.
Yeah.
Which led to a lot of, like, translation goofs. And also, because the game was made for the Famicom disk system, and it wasn't necessarily intended for the Nintendo, there are a lot of things that carried over and, like, created confusion that would waste dozens of hours of people's time.
Yeah.
One of the biggest ones that I remember playing as a kid was, in the manual, there is... They describe a certain enemy, and they talk about, in the manual, how it's weak to sound. And what does that mean? Because there aren't any items that have anything to do with sound in The Legend of Zelda.
Well, no, you have the whistle.
You have the whistle,
so you think you blow the whistle around those things, but that's not it.
No, it's not it at all. It doesn't do jack.
Or Daniel, or Jeremy. Doesn't do any of us.
As a kid, I was like, well, that means I have to find a different item, right? There must be another item around somewhere. And so you'd wander around for however long, and there's nothing around. Well, it turns out the Japanese Famicom had a microphone in the controller, and if you blew into the microphone, it would kill these creatures.
But
And
yeah,
no one had bothered to localize the manual enough
Right.
to take that bit out.
To take that out, yeah.
interesting enough, it was only in the Player 2 controller on the Famicom. That
Oh,
had.
really?
Yeah,
Famicom is such a weird system.
definitely. So, I mean, I guess if my uncle and I had a Famicom, at least I could have blown into the Player 2 controller for him, and felt like I was accomplishing something, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be weird. I'm just imagining two people playing through this game, and one of them, their only job is to blow into the controller.
I'm sure that happened.
Oh,
Honestly,
I'm sure.
in Japan.
It has to have.
But that's pretty forward thinking, too. Like, that's pretty insane development right there. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I
I
can't
remember
think of anything.
the DS had that ability
Yeah.
for, like, Spirit Tracks or something like that.
Yep.
But
And
that was
the
like 25 years later, 24 years later.
Phantom Hourglass, too.
That's probably the one I'm thinking of. One of those two. Maybe both.
Yeah. So you had also just fun fact differentiating the Nintendo release and the Famicom release. I didn't know, but the Famicom actually has a different soundtrack than the Nintendo one, which anyone who's super into video game music, that's a big deal.
But the
because
Nintendo one is perfect.
the Nintendo soundtrack is one of the most iconic ones of all
Oh
time.
my god, it's so good.
Yeah.
The most iconic series of bleeps and bloops ever blooped on screen.
Yeah. Like, sometimes I listen to it to fall asleep. I'm not joking. Not because
Wow.
it's that boring, but it's soothing. Like,
Yeah. But the Famicom one had... So the Famicom was capable of putting out multiple sound channels. So it could have more sound data in the game. And so a lot of the sound effects and the music had, like, more quality to them. And, like, they sound a little bit richer and a little bit different. It's very much worth going to look up the soundtrack. Just look up the Legend of Zelda FDS Famicom Disk System, and it's noticeable. Like, it's noticeably different. It's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say something though?
Yeah, go for
About that soundtrack?
it. Yeah.
I feel like I'm the only one like saying anything negative about the game tonight, but somebody has to, so I guess it'll be me. But the dungeon music gets kind of repetitive and grates on my nerves a little bit.
Oh,
Like, especially when
yeah.
you can't figure out what you have to do and you're just wandering around and it's this same just loop over and over. Oh
Yeah.
my god. It drives me nuts.
that is a fair complaint. I will also raise you just another audio complaint. When the low health bleeping sound
Yes!
is one of the most irritating noises ever put into a video game. And it's like, it's not because the sound effect itself is terrible. Like, I get why it's there. It's useful, but it just never stops. Because the game is so hard, you're always hurt if you're not that great at it.
Right.
And so that can mean you're listening to that beep, beep, beep. It's like a hospital heart monitor sound.
Yeah.
And it's just reminding you of your own mortality and how much you stink at the game for hours and hours and hours if you're, keep getting hurt.
Yep.
And like it's enough to drive someone crazy. But
But those are fairly minor complaints.
yeah, I think a more substantial complaint to your point that you made earlier is that while the game is hard, I think there are some times where it's so unimaginably obtuse,
Right.
like how you're supposed to get an item or where you're supposed to go. Like, I compared it to Dark Souls earlier, But Dark Souls has incredible level design to where, like, there's almost always a telltale sign that there's something there. There's almost always, like, something that the game is doing to give you a hint that there is a secret, or there is something hidden, or where you need to go.
Yeah.
And The Legend of Zelda does not have that.
No, it does not at all. I mean, those bushes that you can burn look exactly the same as other bushes. The
walls that you can bomb.
The walls that you can bomb look exactly the same as the other walls.
I will say that the walls in the dungeons that you can bomb sometimes look like they'd be places you can put bombs. Sometimes.
I think that, from what I read, that's a result of the beta testing. Like, that's one of the things
really?
Miyamoto conceded was, like, because you have to know where those are to get through the dungeons. Right?
Yeah.
You don't really need to know, like, in the open world, it's really more of a secret, an Easter egg, whatever you want to call it. But in the dungeons, you need to know where to do that to be able to advance.
That's true, except that there are a couple times in the overworld where you need to find...
You do need to know where the burning bushes are, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're Moses, you won't find them.
And there's nothing that tips you off, and that is, to me, probably one of the single biggest knocks you can make against The Legend of Zelda. Because expecting your players to go through every single bush trying to light them on fire... that's a bit ridiculous. And I think that's a problem they definitely addressed in future entries in the series, where you had, cracks in a wall, or weird visual
just
things,
even
or
slightly
audio
different
things.
Color, like in some places, and you're like, well, what's up with that?
Exactly. And, maybe it's a limitation of what the NES was capable of at the time, but also, I'm not 100% willing to give it that benefit of the doubt, particularly because when they released The Legend of Zelda, not Ocarina of Time, just The Legend of Zelda in the United States, they discovered that they had the size of the game only took up half the cartridge space. So they were able to actually fit an entire second quest, a New Game Plus, onto the cartridge. And if you can do that, you can probably fit a few extra textures for, like, miscellaneous wall-breaking areas.
Yeah, the second quest is... I never actually tried that. Well, I never finished the first quest. But I've learned, I read... Well, actually, I watched this on YouTube. That if you name yourself Zelda, you can actually start off on the second quest.
That is true. I think I accidentally discovered that as a kid. Just because I was like, well, it's The Legend of Zelda. You got to be named Zelda, right?
I wonder how many people did that. They're like, Jesus, this game is really hard.
Well, yeah, but so, like, if you can fit an entire New Game Plus, which was something that hadn't really been done before in games, not, like, on a grand scale anyway, then you can fit a few extra textures into the game, right? Come on.
This was also the first game that actually had a battery, so you could save your progress.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's important.
It's huge.
And
where would you be now if you couldn't save your progress playing a game? Like,
well, and it's also like that's a bit. It's weird because Nintendo was so against bringing it to North America, but if you look at it from a business perspective, it makes sense. They had to alter their entire means of producing Nintendo cartridges just to bring this game to North America, because the Famicom disk system in Japan was what let them have saved games on your game. But they had to add an entire battery into their production process just so people could save their games. And so it makes a little bit more sense why they were like, oh, I don't know if we want to bring it to America.
Do any of us know why they didn't just bring, like, the literal Famicom to America instead of making it different? Like, what's up with that?
I think it was because, again, like, the market crash.
So, like, the NES was cheaper to produce?
Well, yeah, because by then they'd been making the NES for a few years, and it was pretty much single-handedly resurrecting the video game market in North America.
Oh, yeah.
And they probably didn't want to dampen the enthusiasm for games by...
But I'm saying, was the NES cheaper to produce than the Famicom? That's why...
Oh.
I mean, why not just...
I mean, I have to imagine it was
reverse the
because,
plug and send the Famicom to America.
I mean, I have to imagine it was because they didn't have, like, you know, the speakers in the controller, for example, or the microphone.
There's a few other things the Famicom has that the NES didn't.
Yeah.
And the sound chip, like the Famicom had a much better sound chip, yeah.
And I don't think the NES had, like, an attachment for a disc system, like, built into it. So, like, just bringing over a disc system for the Nintendo wasn't an option either.
So they thought if they had a cheaper version that was similar, it would sell better in America. They're probably right, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what they were thinking.
Because it still wasn't cheap. How much was Nintendo? I mean, the Nintendos were $300 when they came out, weren't they?
Oh, I think they might have been even more.
They were
expensive.
I don't remember.
They were not inexpensive. So
they were like 1980s money too.
Yeah,
so
I mean, the games were as much as they are now.
Yeah, 1980s money. I mean, it was probably. I mean, you probably had to sell a couple of kilos.
I think it was actually $2.99, honestly.
Yeah, I have to imagine that in 80s dollars, it was probably around 500.
Well, when you count inflation, yeah. But I mean, like literally in 1986 or 85, when it came to America, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I think it was $300. So that'd be like $546 now, at least.
But like, the audacity to paint your cartridges gold. Like, that's freaking badass.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's brilliant marketing strategy. Like,
yeah.
They showed it off through the box to make sure people knew you're getting something special.
This is the gold standard. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else can we say about The Legend of Zelda?
Are we gonna... So, and this is also commonly known, but one question I have for you, Jeremy, about Breath of the Wild, is it kind of a sci-fi-esque game, like fantasy sci-fi?
Yeah, so like...
Yeah, because there's machines, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like The Legend of Zelda meets Skyrim meets Mass Effect.
Okay.
The more I say, like, each of those three franchises, the less amount that's in it. But definitely there's a lot of tech in it. Like, it looks like Flintstones tech, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely tech.
I ask because in the official timeline of the Legend of Zelda series, the Legend of Zelda is actually the second to last one, at least in one of the timelines, and it was originally intended to be a sci-fi game as opposed to a fantasy adventure. And Miyamoto even said the Triforce was originally supposed to be microchips instead of, this magical relic.
Yeah, you carry around a magical relic now that basically is like a data pad for Mass Effect. But it looks like it's Stone Age.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm wondering if Breath of the Wild is supposed to maybe be like a future, like an even farther future in the Zelda timeline.
The timeline is so confusing. Like
you say, there are three different ones.
You say official timeline, but yeah, they're all official.
I mean,
it was in the Hyrule Historia that they put out. So
yeah, but Miyamoto still says. I think Miyamoto just trolls all those people every time he tells them any information. Like, I don't even think he knows. Honestly, he's like.
I mean, he says he does.
I just make shit up as I go. I don't care.
That's probably it. I think he doesn't care. Because
do you think in 1984 when he was developing The Legend of Zelda, he's thinking my master plan is in 2017 to have this be the second to last game in the timeline? Like, no.
Well, I think he probably knows the general connection between all the games, but it's supposed to all be thematic connections. It's not supposed to be this weird fan community that comes around literally every single pop culture thing to try and figure out when it's supposed to have happened in relation to this other thing. Like, it's supposed to be this timeless folktale, fairy tale about
Dylan's really
fighting
big into
evil.
the timeline thing, and it gets annoying because like he's got justifications for everything, and like it's like, dude, enjoy the game, right? Like I don't think it's that complicated.
I don't hold it against people who are into that, just because like if you're getting enjoyment out of trying to figure out where this is in relation to other things, then go for it.
But it's like that pendulum. There's a point where it becomes not enjoyment, and they start arguing with people over things that like could really go either way. Like I see them more as alternate universes than timelines.
But isn't that what an alternate timeline would be? Just another universe?
It's like BioShock, where it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
Well, it does matter.
Well, all right, so it does kind of matter in BioShock, but let's not get into it.
Yeah. Like I just think it's there's no order to play the games in like that's right. And what are you gonna wait until you're 360 years old to play a game that came out in say 1996?
Yes, you have to,
because Ocarina of Time is where on the timeline exactly?
It's pretty far in the past. I think there are like maybe 2 or 3 games before Ocarina of Time.
Like if you look at this one, like Breath of the Wild on the surface, it makes you feel like it's very far in the future because of the techie thing. But if you ask somebody like Dylan, he's like, well, technically it's blah, 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 blah. And that's when you're just like, whatever, man.
It does make sense that the original Legend of Zelda would be kind of in a post-apocalyptic future scenario because... there aren't any towns. All the NPCs are living underground.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely Fallout Shelter-esque, but I've seen too many timeline videos and theories, and they all can make, like, it's like anything else. Like, Donald Trump can make sense when he wants to. Doesn't mean it's right. You can spin things any way you want.
Do you guys have any other things you want to bring up about Legend of Zelda?
Not really. I feel like we covered it pretty well.
Okay. So where are you guys falling on this? Is this a best game period?
Well, it's definitely better than Donkey Kong Country 2 or 3.
Suck
hold
it,
on, hold on. I gotta go get out my wife's shopping list. But seriously, Daniel, what do you think?
No, it's definitely a best games period. For sure. Of course. It's just, I mean, it still holds up. It's fun to play, as Obtuse says it is. It is fun to play, and
wait, did you just make a triangle joke?
Yes, I did.
Good one.
It's just as hypotenuse.
It still has a ton of influence over the industry, still to this day. It's a best games period. Absolutely. Our podcast would be a friggin' joke if we didn't include this game as the best game period.
Well, I'm not entirely sure our podcast isn't a joke to begin with, but yeah, definitely this game is the best games period. I will give it the caveats, like, to play it now is way different than playing it in 1987. Like, you don't have to suffer. And you shouldn't.
Right.
Like I think you should try to play it on your own and try to advance on your own, but if you get stuck, for God's sakes, just look it up. Doesn't mean you gotta look everything up, but just look up that part. But yeah, I think, like, totally everybody should play this game. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, The Legend of Zelda is just such a touchstone, both just a cultural touchstone in general, and also a touchstone for video games, because if you play The Legend of Zelda, you are going to see where a ton of games drew inspiration from, and continue to draw inspiration from
and
to this
not
day.
Not just Zelda games, obviously. Like, tons of games.
Even outside the franchise. In fact, like, we were talking about that forced connection that Miyamoto wanted to force people into to talk about games and stuff like that by taking away the sword and forcing people to talk about The Legend of Zelda. That actually became the building blocks for his ideas on Animal Crossing, which, like, you can find The Legend of Zelda's influence in even something as seemingly disconnected as Animal Crossing. And then just outside of Nintendo, you have so many other games that draw inspiration from this series. And you're right, our podcast would be a complete joke if it wasn't voted as a best game period. And I'm like, my vote goes to it, hands down.
Yeah.
But I also think that it is one of those games, and this is very rare for a game, but I think that it is a game that has gotten better over time. I think the internet makes this game much more enjoyable and better than it might have been than when it launched in 1980.
It's not a game you look at with rose-colored glasses, so to speak. Like, it's literally a game that holds up, and it's something.
Is there
like
a UFO outside your house?
No, you're hearing Breath of the Wild.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
it's so close and
real
yet so
time.
far.
Yeah. It's exciting.
I know, and the door's shut. You must be getting excited. Yeah, I mean, like, one of my favorite games of all time is Okami. I don't think Okami would exist without the original Legend of Zelda. It just wouldn't.
Oh, right. Definitely not.
Hands down. It might be the best game, the easiest best game period that we've ever talked about, to be honest with you.
Yeah, this one was kind of a gimme. Like, I don't feel like there are many people who went into this episode thinking that we were going to say anything other than what we just said. But, you know, it had to come up at some point. We just couldn't not do an episode about The Legend of Zelda.
I will say there are some Zelda games that I may not call the best game period.
Oh, yeah. Definitely
But this is definitely not one of them.
I'm looking forward to when we talk about The Legend of Zelda 2. Adventure of Link, because I think that game might be a bit more divisive.
It's really weird how the formula changed so much between those two games, but yeah, it's worth discussing
for sure. So the Nintendo Switch just came out.
It did. That's accurate.
Hopefully you got one. If you didn't,
if not, hey,
best of luck.
I will sell you mine for the low price of $74,000.
Whoa, undercutting the competition.
That's right.
All right, Jack, can you tell us all about Extra Life?
Sure. It all started a long time ago. When I was just a boy. No, Extra Life is a wonderful charity through Children's Miracle Network hospitals. And it's kind of like how people get together and have walkathons or run marathons for charity. Except instead of doing those things, people play games. It's really a wonderful idea. So you play games, you raise money for kids, and one of the coolest parts about it is when you sign up, you actually can choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital you want your money to go towards. And 100% of all the money you raise from friends, families, strangers, all of it goes to that hospital to take care of sick and injured kids. It's really wonderful. The hospitals legitimately see that money come in and are able to change kids' lives with it. So it's pretty fantastic. You can learn more about it over on extra-life.org. And if you want to jump into the community, meet some people in your local area, maybe even read some interesting articles, you can head over to community.extra-life.org and just see who's doing what in your area. Or if you don't feel like doing that, you can do your own thing. Have a local game night at your local game store, or just have a bunch of friends over and charge them like $5 a pop to go towards charity. Really, however far you want to take it is up to you. We have some people who are like, hey, we want to have a gaming marathon every month, and we're going to do that. Or we have some people who are like, you know what? I'm going to stream and raise money on my video game Twitch stream. Or we have other people who are like, we're going to have a special Dungeons & Dragons fundraiser night. Really, however far you want to take it is up to you. This year on November 4th is kind of the PR push day, where people all across the country are going to be getting together to do 24-hour video game marathons. If you can't participate in that, that's totally fine. Participate however you feel comfortable doing it. Sentences are hard. Daniel talked a lot.
This year I plan on participating by listening to Daniel Jones tell me about how his morning went. That should take 27 hours.
Well, you see, it started with...
And you can
go to the bathroom.
You can find this podcast on community.extra-life.org, as well as a number of other places, which I feel like Daniel can tell you about succinctly and shortly.
Well, it starts with getting out of bed, making sure that your podcast app is up to date. No, you can find us on iTunes, as well as Libsyn, our hosting site, as well as SoundCloud. You can also find us posting the podcast every Monday on Twitter @bestgamesperiod, as well as on Game Informer, and like Jack said, community.extra-life.org. That's every Monday, and you can also give us a review on iTunes if you would like, because we would love it. You can also support us on Patreon. We now have a Patreon. If you support us, depending on what tier, we do record some bonus material. Sometimes it's just me rambling on for hours about random things that happened in my day. Sometimes it's just Jeremy cleaning his litter box. Sometimes, it's Jack just walking Samus and talking about Samus's bowel movements. But they're really worth the money, I promise. No,
only
really,
one of
not.
those things has actually been recorded.
They're not really that. But we try to make interesting content, and we can do that better with your support. So we would love it if you would support our Patreon. You can also find that how can they find that? What's the URL?
I think it's just patreon.com/bestgames.
Awesome. Jack?
Daniel?
Jeremy?
God, Daniel. Yes.
Thank you for joining me tonight for this adventure through Hyrule and beyond. And thank you, good listeners, for joining us for episode 54 of the Best Games Period. We'll be back next week with what will definitely be one of the most interesting podcasts we've done since the show started. So stay tuned for that. Till next time, we'll see you on the flippity-a-dippity.
Woo-ha.
Whoa, one of the most interesting episodes we've ever done. That's some hype.
Why do people think racehorses pee a lot? I've never understood that.
I didn't.
I mean, do you know that they don't?
Right, I was just gonna say I didn't know that
Well,
they don't.
is the expression not I have to piss like a Russian racehorse? Right?
I don't know. I've never heard the Russian part.
I haven't heard the Russian part.
So, A, I'm not sure if Russian means like it'll country Russian or like Russian as in Sanic, gotta go fast. I'm not really sure.
That would make more sense if it's like rushing, as in gotta go fast.
Yeah. But which racehorse doesn't rush?
Well, I think it's just saying that you have to pee as fast as a racehorse.
But
right?
Does a racehorse pee any faster than a standard horse?
Well, no, I think it's saying I have to go really quickly. Like, I really need to go to the bathroom.
I see.
And I need to get there as fast as a rushing racehorse.
Rushing.
Okay. Now it makes sense. Yeah.
There we go. We unpacked that.
Yeah.